At the age of 8, my mother's boyfriend come in. He absolutely beat the brakes off of her. And what me and my brother would do was we would always clean up the mess afterwards. Well, that night, we cleaned up the mess. There was an end table that was broken. We had piled it up on the back porch. And that was the moment that clicked in my head. It's like, I'm not going to allow this anymore. He proceeds to abuse me and my siblings and my mother as well. I ran out to the back porch. I had grabbed the table leg, and when I come back inside, I had almost beat the man to death with it. To me, in my mind at that time, I believe it was justified. I was protecting my family, I was protecting my mother. However, the judicial system did not see it that way. I never knew anything about Christ at that time. But I did know that I'd been through 3 prison numbers, 13 treatment centers. I had tried NA, I had tried AA, I had tried to tweak the blueprint so many times and it never worked. But the one thing that I did not try was Jesus. My name is JC Foos. First and foremost, I do want to say I didn't grow up in a Christian home. I didn't know Christ till way later on in my life. But I'm originally from Columbus. Both my parents are addicts. My father was in and out of prison most of my life. Actually, still is to this day. But my mother was an addict as well, and through her addiction, she was very male dependent, which what I mean is she would depend on men to supply her habit, take care of her, things like that. Because of that, and the lifestyle that she was living, a lot of the men were very unpleasant. They were not fun to be around. That come with a lot of abuse in every aspect, physical, mental, sexual. So a lot of my earliest childhood memories are probably the most traumatic. I'd received many broken bones, skull fractures, would get cigarettes put out on me. It was rough growing up. So my mom was a cocaine addict. We lived on the west side of Columbus. She had got with this guy. He was very abusive. Not just to her, but to me and my brother as well. He would do things like lock me and my brother in the bedroom and make us fight each other till we both come out a bloody mess. Well, at that time my mom was real bad off on cocaine, and she would always send me and my brother to her drug dealer's house so she could go on benders. When we would go over there, the man would molest me. My mother, I confronted her later on in life about this, and she swears that she didn't know, but honestly I don't think that was the case. So anyway, going on, at that time she was real bad off on cocaine. The guy that she was with was extremely abusive. She wasn't with that guy for very long because he had threw her out a 3-story window of Wedgwood Apartments. Because of that, he ended up going to prison. My mom had moved us from Columbus, Ohio to Pike County. And at that time, because she broke her back, her addiction had changed. It went from cocaine, which was easily accessible in bigger cities, to now getting prescribed pain medication. Her addiction just switched. She kept living the same lifestyle, very male dependent, which comes to more boyfriends, more abuse. And that had happened pretty much most of my childhood. Well, at the age of 8, something had switched in my head. Something had told me, like, something had clicked. It's like, I'm not going to allow this anymore. So that night when that happened, my mother's boyfriend come in. He absolutely beat the brakes off of her. And what me and my brother would do was we would always clean up the mess afterwards. Well, that night we cleaned up the mess. There was an end table that was broken. We had piled it up on the back porch. And that was the moment that clicked in my head. It's like, I'm not going to allow this anymore. Went to bed, went on about our day. The next day, well, that night he comes in inebriated, under the influence of who knows what. He proceeds to abuse me and my siblings and my mother as well. And like I had previously said, something clicked in my head that said I wasn't going to take that anymore. So when that happened, I ran out to the back porch. I had grabbed the table leg, and when I come back inside, I had almost beat the man to death with it. To me, in my mind at that time, I believe it was justified. I was protecting my family, I was protecting my mother. However, the judicial system did not see it that way. I ended up getting a felonious assault at 8 years old. And because of that, they had sent me to DYS. I'd spent 2 years in DYS. And if anybody knows anything about that, it's probably worse than any adult prison I've ever been to. And kids are young, they're wild, they have no control over their impulses, they're quickly angered. So the whole 2 years was completely miserable. You're fighting every day. At that time, when I was doing the 2 years, my mother practically abandoned me at that time. No visits, no phone calls. That put some anger and some bitterness inside of me because I was protecting her, I was protecting my family. Anyway, I do the time, I get out. At that time, my mother's addiction was as worse as it possibly could have been. She was getting prescribed pain pills, but that's when the big pharma come into play, the Oxycontin and things like that were around. I was 10 years old at this time. Me and my brother got introduced into that lifestyle. We got tired of seeing my mother sick all the time. And that's how we went down the route that we did, is we started hustling to keep her well. That didn't last long before we started using. Man, a lot of crazy stuff had happened during that time. We was moving all over the place. My mother was abusive. She wasn't properly healed from everything she had been through. I had built a resentment towards my brother because of me getting sexually abused, and my mother always being aggressive towards me and never to him. Anyways, so that had went on for a long time. Me and my brother hustling to keep my mother well. Me and my brother started getting high. It was, and we didn't start off with, marijuana or alcohol like most people did. It was straight to it, OxyContin, Xanax, all the heavy stuff, really. Um, and that had went on for so that was when I was about 10. It went on for about 5 years. Just my mom constantly being with more men, them trying to abuse us, our addiction, just the chaos, man. It was constant chaos all the time. And I'd become comfortable in that. So at about 15, which I was in and out of JDC throughout those years, I'd already had a juvenile prison number. So anytime I would get in trouble, off I went. When I was about 15, I'd met this older gentleman. At that time, he was my drug dealer. Me and my mom had got into an argument, and they charged me with domestic violence, even though I didn't even touch her. But I had already had previous charges. So they sent me to JDC, and their stipulation on me getting out was I couldn't go back to my mother's house. So that man that was my drug dealer, he showed up at court, which they didn't know none of this. He showed up to court. It was like, hey, he can come move in with me. So that's what I did. Behind the scenes, they didn't know that he had ulterior motives. I ended up being his little runner boy. I was selling drugs for him, anything and everything. We was dabbling in just about everything at that time. And that had went on for several years, and then I had met a girl, and lo and behold, she gets pregnant. We end up getting an apartment, and at that time I thought that was my cure-all. I had always told myself I was going to be the father that I never had. I thought when my son was brought into this world that my addiction was just going to disappear. Well, definitely was not the case. It progressed. I was introduced to heroin, started using heroin pretty heavily, started selling heroin to maintain my habit. Me and her had split up about a year or two down the road, and I get with this other girl, still selling heroin. Well, that didn't last long because I ended up selling to an informant. They raided my house. Luckily, that was my first felony as an adult. So they showed me some grace on that. I ended up getting 3 years in North Central Correctional Facility. Done my time there. And honestly, the majority, all my 20s were in and out of institutions of all sorts. Prison, rehabs, mental facilities. So I done my 3 years there, wasn't that long, caught a felonious assault as an adult, did another 18 months on that. In and out of rehab, like I had said. And then after my second number, they had sent me to a CBCF in Nelsonville, and I had done good. I'd graduated the program. I moved back to Columbus. I was working. I was sober. I wouldn't say I was in recovery, but I would say I was sober. And lo and behold, I was a year clean at that time. Lo and behold, I get the worst news that I had ever got in my life. Me and my brother had went through a lot together. We had a bond that nobody else had. We was only a year apart. And that night, I ended up getting a call that he had overdosed and died. I was a year clean. It went out the window quickly. I got a hold of an acquaintance, relapsed, went right back to it. Ended up burning all my bridges and Columbus, so therefore I moved back down to Pike County. Heavily in my addiction. That lasted for about 4 months. 4 months into my addiction. After that, I'd caught another case. I'd caught a burglary. End up going back to prison. Mind you, I was angry and bitter after everything that I had been through, all the trauma, everything everybody had done to me as a child, my mother, my father, the abandonment. And then when my brother died, that all just progressed. That was my lifelong best friend. Well, subconsciously, I wasn't even aware of what happened at the time, but when I got to prison this last time, I become affiliated. I didn't know what I was doing at the time, but now looking back on it, I see that I was looking for that brother that I had lost. So I'd become affiliated. Angry, bitter. I was taught growing up that you handled every situation with aggression. Therefore, I fought all the time. So that time in prison, with that anger intensified, that's all I did. I was at Lancaster for about 6 months. Caught a Rule 3 assault there. They leveled me up to a level 3 prison and sent me to Mansfield. While at Mansfield, out of a 18-month sentence, I spent a year of it in the hole. Done my time. Didn't have nowhere to go when I got out. So I went right back to the streets. I went right back to what I had known. At that point in time, my addiction switched from opiates and heroin to amphetamines. I'd started selling amphetamines, and the people that I was staying with and selling out of their house, my aggression had gotten so bad. I would shoot off 223 off in the house at them. I was chasing them with ball bats and knives. Because of that, they ended up calling my parole officer on me. They come and arrested me. Took me to jail. I had a meeting with my parole officer. Her stipulation was prison or treatment. But she also said that if you decided to go back to prison, you're going to sit in jail. I'm getting ready to go on vacation. So it's hard telling how long it's going to be before you ride out. So for me, that was an easy answer. I told her, You can send me to treatment. I'm probably not going to stay though. Got there, was very unhappy. I was dry drunk syndrome, if you know what that is. You're clean. You want the benefits of being clean, but you're completely miserable. And that was me at that time. Well, I decided to leave one day, and I ended up making some friends in there, and I'd met this guy, and he was like, okay, if you're going to leave tomorrow. So I'm like, okay, I'll leave tomorrow. Well, tomorrow come, I went to go leave. If you're going to leave tomorrow. And that went on for a couple weeks until I had found out my son's mother had lost custody of him. And I really feel like that was my second chance to try to make an amends of some sort, try to make things right. Honestly, I didn't realize it at the time, but that was God giving me a second chance to have the life that I wanted for my son, that I wanted for myself. So I went through the whole process with CPS, all that good stuff. Graduated inpatient treatment. I had the mindset of I wasn't ready yet, so I decided to go to a sober living. That's when everything really started to change for me. That is where I was introduced to Christ. I had met a woman, or a female, which is now my wife. She had grew up in church. I never knew anything about Christ at that time. But I did know that I'd been through 3 prison numbers, 13 treatment centers. I had tried NA, I had tried AA, I had tried to tweak the blueprint so many times and it never worked. But the one thing that I did not try was Jesus. So she talks me into going to church with her, and I go to church, and I can honestly say that when I walked out of that church, I was not the same person. I fully surrendered to Him in that church service. And from there forward, my life started changing drastically. I didn't realize it at that time, but He had completely delivered me from my addiction. Ever since that day, I had not had a craving. I had not had an urge, not had any kind of unction to go back to that lifestyle. So, with that being said, I compare my life to part of the scripture out of Exodus 14, and that's when Moses is leading the Israelites out of Egypt, and he was doing so, right? And God had hardened Pharaoh's heart, and Pharaoh decided to go back after the Israelites. And they started complaining to Moses, and they was like, why did you deliver us out of Egypt only to come to the desert and die? Didn't we tell you that we would just stay and serve the Egyptians? And his response to him, man, is so powerful. He had told them, be still, see the salvation that the Lord has had from you, because the Egyptians that you see today, you will never see them again. And that right there, I compare that to my addiction and the experience I had went through that night in that church service. From that day forward, I had not seen my addiction. or a lot of the character defects that come along with that. He had completely delivered me from that. And honestly, like, in that moment, I was so grateful for him redeeming me, for him redeeming my soul. It had put this hunger and this thirst in me that could not be quenched. So how do you find out who Christ is? You get into his word. And I started getting into his word, even at Sober Living. Like, people were doing AOD groups, and I'm studying and I'm getting in the word. I'm reading the bread of life. And I started applying that to my life. And therefore, like, things started changing, right? So I tell a lot of people, it's the 3 R's for me. First, he redeemed my soul. Because of that put a gratitude inside of me. Therefore, I wanted to know him more. So I started to get into his word, because his word explains exactly who he is. And from that and the application of his word to my life, he started to renew my mind. And from the renewal of my mind, he used that to refine my character into who I am today, and he's continuously doing that. So that gratitude in that moment has really transpired a series of events to get me to the point to where I am today. Man, there's a key verse. There's a couple key verses I want to say here that really, like, they're promises that I have hung on to for so long. The first is John 10:10. It says this, that the thief come to steal, kill, and destroy, but I have come to give you life and give it more abundantly. That is a promise that he gives us, and I can tell you, I am evidence of that. The thief had tried everything to keep me bound, to keep me broken, to keep me lost. But the moment that I surrendered and I allowed him into my life, he has blessed me with that abundant life. Now the second verse I want to focus on is Romans 8:28. It says that, and we know it, in all things God works for the good to those who love him and are called according to his purpose. That tells me that as a believer, it doesn't matter what I go through. He will use it for the good. That as a believer, my life is not always going to be rainbows and butterflies. I'm going to go through trials. I'm going to go through tribulation. The enemy is going to attack me. The enemy is going to try to oppress me. But as long as I remain steadfast, as long as my eye remains single on Jesus, he will use that for the good. So here I sat, man. Here I sat. Yes, I was broken. I was lost. I was bound and afflicted at one time, but he had set me free. And now he has put me in a position to where I can help others, because that love that he expressed to me in that one moment, and he has continuously expressed to me from that moment forward, has softened my heart. It has softened my heart. I was an angry, bitter man. Ezekiel 36:26 that says that he will take the heart of stone and turn it to a heart of flesh. And his love, his grace, and his mercy has done that for me. Therefore, I try my best to express that to others. And that's the whole point of it. That's the whole point of the gospel, is that he come to set us free. And from that moment forward, we let our light shine, because this world is a nasty and a dark place. And a lot of people like to run on self-will. But if you surrender your will and seek his will out for your life, the possibilities are endless. So I work in recovery, peer support. I'm out and about in the community a lot. Man, I meet people where they're at, and that's easy for me. It's because I've been through it all, man. I've been through it all. So it's easy for me to show grace in situations that most people aren't willing to. I work in recovery ministry. I'm a firm believer that Jesus is recovery. That's what it was for me. That's the only way to have a complete lifestyle change, which is the definition of recovery. Try Jesus. Because if you could do it your own way, if you could do it yourself, you would have done it a long time ago.